This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Why the city bought AutoZone Park, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by a number of people from the Memphis City Council. Wanda Halbert, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Harold Collins, also the Memphis City Council. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Ted Evanoff is business editor of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Thanks for being here. And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. The council voted this week to buy AutoZone Park, the baseball park where the Redbirds play. Both of you voted against. I should say from the outset that we tried to get some folks from the city on who had advocated for this deal and some other folks from city council who voted for it. We couldn't work that out. So if you'll forgive me as I channel some of the other points of view. But let me start with you, Wanda Halbert. Why did you vote against this deal?
Well, you know, it was really interesting because we were in a serious quagmire. Either we're going to have a facility that is left empty, not sure what to do with it, or we were going to enter into this arrangement. I think a couple of the major challenges for me, one, over the last few years, the mayor has come to the city council and the citizens of Memphis and said, look, we're financially strapped. We've got to reduce jobs, we've got to reduce services, raise taxes, and the people are saying, well, how are we consistently finding money to do some of these other projects, but we can't pave streets like we need to. The blight remediation, even though some of those things have started, we've been struggling with those issues for a long time. The lack of jobs, the high unemployment and poverty rate in Memphis, there are a number of challenges. And then the other issue that really glared out to me was the fact that the administration did not share with me that we jointly own the property that the stadium sits on with the county government. They're still trying to work out that deal, not sure where that's going to go. You know, growing a fan base and including the citizens of Memphis, that portion of it has not been discussed or finalized. So there are a lot of open questions. What if the deal falls through, then what? That was a specific question that was asked, and the mayor said, we really don't know. So when you come to the table with this kind of issue, in my opinion, we need to come full circle.
Yeah.
We need to be able to tell where we are and where we're going.
All right, we raised a bunch of good points. Let me get Harold Collins in to just give your perspective on voting against it.
I just had two reasons. One, should the Cardinals or the Redbirds leave after year 5, there was really no financial penalty, except for to file a lawsuit against them for claims. And we all know that Major League sport franchises get up and leave because they want to, because the owners make different deals. And so I don't think that the state of Tennessee has any recourse to keep the Cardinals here to make them pay a bill, because we are the ones who signed the debt. And the second one, to me, was very obvious. The Cardinals wouldn't even accept the fact that should they leave, they pay the indebtedness on the stadium, just like the Grizzlies. What separates or makes the Cardinals different from what the Grizzlies have done? I mean, the Grizzlies moved here from Vancouver. They immediately said, yeah, we'll do this. We love the Grizzlies, we love the Cardinals. I mean, some of us do love the Cardinals. But at the end of the day, they're no different than anybody else. And we should not have, in my opinion, got into a relationship like that.
Yeah, and Bill, let me check me as I walk through the terms of the deal as I understand it. The city is going to issue bonds through the Center City
Revenue Finance Corporation.
19.5 to buy the stadium, 19.5 million, 4 million in improvements and changes. Then the Cardinals have bought the team, so the entities are separate now. The Cardinals will have signed a lease or an agreement, 17 years, I believe, to have the team there. They'll pay about $300,000 a year to lease the stadium from the city. And then there's some backstop, if revenue falls short through sales tax revenue and so on, the Cardinals would put up $100,000, and then AutoZone Incorporated, the company headquartered downtown, would also put up $100,000. Did I get that right?
Right. Those two are backstops in the event that the sales tax rebate revenue does not meet the marks or hit the marks that it's supposed to do, and that's the largest single factor in paying off the debt from the bonds in this. And some of the council members who voted for it said that that extra $200,000 of that contingency was what changed their attitude on this, so to speak, because you had a number of council members who, if they weren't opposed to it, were certainly on the fence about it and didn't want to vote on it the previous 2 times that it was delayed by the council.
And going back to you, Wanda Halbert, you talked about, the troubles the city has and difficulties with, it's a tough economy and, the city is financially strapped. Were you also, I think you said, concerned that if the deal didn't happen, you'd have this in the heart of downtown, some 500,000 people a year, give or take, come to downtown. They spend a certain amount of money. They go to restaurants. They buy, Redbird's gear. They help to, stimulate the economy to some degree. Were you worried about leaving that empty?
Well, in my mind, I think when you have a situation that exists like that, you have to get crafty. We have a number of colleges and universities, schools, junior high, high schools. We have RBI teams. We have Little League teams. There are a number of ways that we could have tried to utilize the stadium, not to suggest that they would have brought in the kind of revenue that you would hope for, but at what point do you make all of these issues about the citizens of Memphis and not just about the dollar? Because just as Harold said, sometimes your intent may be good. There may be some good efforts and good faith efforts made, but just as the Cardinal representative said, they can't guarantee that they're going to stay. So then what? We'll find ourselves back in that very situation where we have to be creative and figure out what we're going to do with that stadium.
Let's go to a soundbite of, I believe this is Paul Morris of Downtown Memphis Commission speaking to you all at the council, talking about for the project, and then Kenneth Whalum speaking against it. And we'll all kind of comment on that. Let's go to the soundbite.
Redbirds are a big part of improving the property values downtown, which is why we generate more property taxes downtown. The Redbirds bring more people to Memphis. We've got to grow as a city, and the Redbirds are part of the package that Memphis has to offer to attract new citizens. The Redbirds ultimately increase property values and therefore increase property taxes. Thank you.
Borrowing $24 million to buy a ballpark when you still owe a judgment of $57 million to your own children is exactly like a deadbeat dad refusing to pay a child support order so he can buy himself a gift.
So let's talk about the first part. Paul Morris talking about property taxes, about the importance that from his point of view, the Redbird Stadium, the Redbirds team plays in attracting people downtown. Your take on that from a pure business point of view.
Well, I think from the business point of view, Eric, any facility that brings 5,000 people a night into downtown is an economic generator. I think right now downtown businesses would say there isn't enough of these economic generators to really support what they have. We've seen a number of businesses close. So I think that from the standpoint of bringing people into the center city, the stadium is fulfilling that goal.
And your take on that, Harold? You must have looked at it and said, look, I don't want to take 500,000 people out of downtown. That's Absolutely. Not a mission you've been elected to do, I assume.
Absolutely. I weighed heavily on that very same subject. Remember, I represent Graceland.
Yeah.
And
right.
so heaven forbid that we have to make a decision about that, knowing what they bring to the community. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we have to make a decision based on what kind of revenues that the city and the citizens of Memphis would be exposed to. Yeah. And my whole vote was based on one answer that the Cardinals or the administration said, and they could not guarantee that they were going to be here or cover the debt should they leave.
Yeah.
And to me, that was very simple.
Yeah.
And
are you comfortable with let's take out the possibility they leave for a second, that the way the numbers work in terms of the sales rebates and basically what it is, the sales tax at the stadium, so goes back to paying down the debt every year. It's roughly $2 million a year that would be paid towards that. So it's not a huge and insurmountable number. Are you comfortable with the projections year to year as they were presented?
I'm comfortable from maybe year 1 to year 7.
Okay.
But as we get further down the line, and remember, we won't be here. It'll be another council and another administration trying to figure this out. But year 7, year 8, year 9, those numbers get wider. And I'm not certain that we can do that. That's why we were concerned about the latter years. Oh no, I knew year 1 through 5 would be fine because the Cardinal general manager said, as soon as this deal goes down, we're going to sign a 4-year contract for player redevelopment or player development.
Yeah.
So we knew they were here at least for 4 years. My concern was years 7, 8, 9, and 10 and going forward after that. Then who's going to be responsible? Are we going to continue to be a city that's struggling to get the streets paved, as Wanda says? Are we going to be a city that continues to have 30% poverty rate? Are we going to be a city that when, and I don't want to divert us, but Electrolux is looking for qualified applicants right now to work in their new facility? Where are we going to be in year 7, 8, and 9, 10 trying to figure out how to make this work?
Yeah, yeah. It was another part of this bill, and we've talked about it on the show, was the presentation, the timing, the way this was brought to council didn't go over real well. There was a lot of criticism of the administration that it was rushed through, that it was going to have to be voted on before Christmas or before the first of the year. And with all the priorities that the council folks here are talking about, wasn't that part of the problem from your perspective, that they rushed it at?
Yeah.
And why did they do that?
Well, initially, the administration told the council that they had to have a decision by the end of the year, by the end of 2013, that this could not wait, that they absolutely had to vote on it.
Right.
Our guests can tell you this is something the council hears quite frequently, and in this case, the bulk of council members, if not all of the council members, were at least highly skeptical of it. The other thing was, and I'll ask both of the council members about this, is there were other factors that were in the committee room as this was discussed. This came up the same council day that the council got a monumental presentation on the city's unfunded pension liability.
Yeah.
It also came up the same day that the council was being asked to approve $15 million in funding for the Crosstown project.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so let me segue and just get both of your thoughts on how much of this was about the ballpark deal and its terms, and how much of it was about the other larger issues and where the ballpark fit into them.
And one other major issue that you didn't mention was the fact that we had just voted down the 1% sales tax for pre-K funding. And so I think for members of the council, it's so frustrating to continue to see and hear and know that we have some very serious challenges ahead of us. But then, even with those important challenges and initiatives, here comes a ballpark out of left field. But what I said to the individuals in the room that I met with, because I got a chance to meet with the team, it was several partners and the mayor, and I said to them, I understand and value the fact that the mayor has to behind the scenes negotiate on any deal. I understand that. Someone in that group, I guess they called themselves getting ahead of the game, went and leaked it to the media, and then they started drumming up the citizens to support it. That was the wrong move to make, because you have to allow the mayor and his administration, in fairness, to discuss the issue, figure out whether it's something that's worthy of bringing it to the council and to the public. But if you step ahead of that process, in which that obviously happened, but the mayor took responsibility for it, of which he should have. But when you step outside of that arrangement, then you start stepping into murky waters, because we all saw the mayor on television saying, I don't know anything about it. And within a week, he had to come back and admit that it was actually on the table.
Harold, when you hear the statement, we need to vote on this today, or we need to vote on this by the end of the year, which is at that point I think 2 or 3 weeks away. Do you believe
or they're going to start taking apart brick by brick and shipping it off?
Right.
Well, number one, we had been down this road before with this administration. I mean, this wasn't the first time that they brought something to us at the 11th hour and told us we had to vote on it in 30 minutes. But here, this is what made me really suspicious. When the administration began to lay out where the funding would come from for the Crosstown project, and they had a litany of things, some conservative energy revenue bonds that we had never heard of, some an MLGW $500,000 for street lighting. And so in particular, I asked for documentation that would show that this was legitimate spending for us to do. And I asked Jerry Collins of Like Gas and Water, I said, Jerry, tell me where you're going to get this $500,000 from in your budget. And Jerry Collins gets to the microphone, which I give him a lot of credit for saying this. He says, Councilman, this is the first time I've seen this.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
That took a lot of gall from him, for him to stand up and say that in an open forum with the mayor in the room. But for them to just throw a line item in there to say MLGW is a part of this, and nobody talks to the president, that shot.
And to clarify, that was on the Crosstown deal. But again, I think there were 6 or 7 when that passed. We had it on the show, 6 or 7 different, obscure funding sources and a lot of questions. And a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, back in the fall when the state controller raised some red flags about city finances, it was in part this kind of shifting of funds from source to source.
And let me say this, just to kind of pick up on what Harold said. Just last night, I was driving down 385. And there are a number of lights on 385 that are out right now. I mean, literally, if you go tonight, it was so dark, and that's what kind of drew my attention to it. I am regularly reporting street lights out throughout the city, even on major thoroughfares. And so here is exactly my concern. How in the world are citizens living every single day in those conditions, but then a situation like this or a project like this pops up, and all of a sudden we have the money? We don't have the money for regular everyday needs, according to the administration.
Let's talk a little bit about the money, Ted. You wrote a very interesting article, which we'll kind of try to sketch out here. And it was one of the concerns that some council members had, I think. I know Lee Harris voted against it, and he voted against this AutoZone deal in part because I think the rough quote was, I don't want all this the money from a city that's struggling, as Wanda Halbers just talked about, going to these Wall Street hedge funds. And Fundamental Advisors is a hedge fund that owned the debt, the bonds, on the stadium. And they walked away and made a tidy little sum, which is what hedge funds are supposed to do. Tell us how that worked.
That's correct, Eric. Fundamental Advisors is essentially a 44-year-old Montreal native named Lawrence Gottlieb. And early in his career, after he graduated from Boston University, he worked for a sports management corporation, then went to work for a large bank in New York. And when the 2007 crash occurred, he left that bank and started Fundamental Advisors. And what they do is they're a vulture fund. They buy the distressed debt of municipalities, corporations, anything they think has some value. And I think Lawrence Gottlieb looked at this stadium, looked at who plays there, the St. Louis Cards AAA franchise, looked at what was across the street, the Peabody. 2 blocks away is Beale Street, and he knew no one is going to walk away from this stadium in Memphis. And so they spent $24 million to essentially buy a $72 million ballpark, or at least a stadium that was built for $72 million. They held that for about 3 years, and they are coming out of this deal with a $7 million, I don't want to call it profit, but $7 million ahead. They're receiving $31 million on their $24 million investment. Some of that $7 million, they'll say they had spent in operating costs in running the ballpark for 3 years. Nevertheless, 7% is, or rather, $7 million is a pretty good return in this era.
Right. Did you have problems with that? Was that, or did that influence your vote?
That did not influence my vote.
Okay.
I knew that the hedge fund people were going to make money.
Yeah.
The question for me was, again, our exposure.
Yeah. And Wanda, did you?
No, that's just the nature of business. That's the
Yeah.
nature of the beast. I mean, he saw an opportunity, he took advantage of it, and he sat and bided his time, and it paid off for him.
Yeah.
So that's just the nature of the business beast. But I will say this, that team, when we spoke, I asked the Redbirds, how did we get here? And they admitted this was a overzealous plan that wasn't necessarily the best business model, because even when you look at the fan base is not there for what exists in that stadium right now.
I mean, that goes back, I don't know if you want to comment on this, Ted, but I mean, that goes back to the beginning. I mean, the whole, and Don Wade from the Memphis Daily News wrote a story about this, the original plans were that they needed some 750,000 a year in attendance, and they peaked at about 900,000 a year. But they've been more under, the 400,000 to 500,000 a year since then. Mm-hmm. And so the $72 million stadium, I mean, in some ways the city got a bargain, I guess, because it was built for a lot of money. It's a beautiful ballpark if you're into that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And the city got it for whatever, 20 million plus. But yeah, the business plan didn't work. Back to when Dean Jernigan and other folks kind of launched this thing, they had sort of lofty goals that they never quite hit.
I think one of the problems they had in the stadium was the construction and the opening of FedEx Forum. There are only so many nickels in Memphis. They tend to come out of the same pockets. And
Right.
once the FedEx Forum opened, it detracted from the fan base that would have gone to AutoZone Park. They probably could have done a better job of marketing it at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And so they had something north of $5 million in annual debt payments every year. And they simply couldn't manage that. Under this new deal for the city, it may be a small consolation, but the debt payments will be down closer to $2 million a year for the city. So you don't need 700,000 people. You don't even need 500,000 people showing up in this facility.
Well, and I know we've done stories over the years, Commercial Appeal's done stories over the years of various management entities that came in, and the problem was they only had so much money for marketing, for events, for fireworks. Everyone loves fireworks. When they had that crushing debt there, they had so much to pay,
Correct.
and they had an avid fan base. Wasn't what projections were, but they had a lot of people who loved the stadium and loved the team. But they just had so much debt. So maybe in this sense, the Cardinals, which is I think everyone would say is a very well-run sports organization,
Right.
they seem to have this plan to be able to do more.
And to
with it.
speak of the fan base, many of us have proposed, since the Cardinals were not willing to take on the debt at the end, why don't we put a surcharge on the ticket?
Yeah.
So that those persons who would know and go to the game would support the indebtedness.
$1 a ticket. I think Jim Strickland put out, maybe you did too.
And they know.
Yeah.
We're not. Whereas the Grizzlies charge a surcharge, even the Tigers
Yeah.
charge you a surcharge for your ticket to help pay their debt.
Yeah.
And so if you want to go and then enjoy that, that's what you do.
Yeah.
And we felt those persons who typically don't come to Memphis except for to see a Redbirds game. I don't know about Ms. Howard, but I got hundreds of emails from Redbird fans, as Councilman Strickland said, as far away from Australia to say, vote for this project, because when I come to Memphis, I want to come see the Redbirds. And so my position was, that's great. So I know you wouldn't
Pay me
mind
$1.
paying an extra dollar for a ticket.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
said, no way, we're not
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. Bill.
Do you all think there was bargaining by the administration on the front end? Do you think the administration bargained with the Redbirds and the Cardinals before they came to you the first time with the term?
I really don't think so. I mean, because there were a number of different issues that they could have considered. One of the things that I put on the table, and the mayor mentioned it, his administration mentioned it, was how do I get the mother with 3 or 4 kids living in Hickory Hill to the Redbirds game? Because she's the one paying for it. How do I get that family to come and participate? Even the RBI program that they're talking about growing and expanding. I told them, a lot of people don't know, but I'm a baseball mom. My boys grew up playing T-ball, Little League, high school, RBI, and one actually went on to college with baseball. So I'm very familiar with the sports. But there has been no outreach to the citizens of Memphis. And while we value and appreciate any citizen, any individual who comes to those games, how do you engage the citizens of Memphis? Because that's what's going to help create the revenue that you really need to sustain. It's a beautiful facility, but you still don't want it empty. And that's something that
I
hasn't
think
been
they did a
put
better
into-
job of, this is just me, I seem to remember in the early years they did a much better job of that. They had more outreach in the community, and maybe because it was locally owned and people like Dean Jernigan and others who were kind of, I don't know, I'll call them philanthropists, but they had the city's interest in mind, that they did a better job, and then maybe it was that debt, Ted, that they just didn't have the money to support some of those efforts.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's fun. And to Bill's point about the negotiation, they admitted that they did negotiate with fundamental advisors and the Redbirds. It wasn't until the council got in and began to negotiate the deal with them through resolutions and amendments that they came back and said, well, okay, we'll do, instead of 20 million, 19.5 million. Instead of 5 million in renovations, we'll do 4.5. And honestly, I believe that once the council took on that role, I don't think that the mayor and the administration could allow a negotiation period to go through, because it would have look very unfavorably upon them.
Do you worry? Let's go a little bit bigger picture here. I mean, you mentioned Graceland. The city put a whole bunch of money into Graceland, $10 or $20 million in the last couple of years. I mean, street improvements and so on.
Yeah, we're doing street improvements on Elvis Presley Boulevard
right.
to the tune of $43
Crosstown
million.
we've talked about, which is $15 million. Beale Street Landing is finally wrapping up. I mean, it was a $40 million project. Bass Pro is a huge project. Is the city overreaching in terms of these investments? I'll start with you.
Well, with the Elvis Presley project, of that $43 million, 27 is state or federal dollars. So the city is putting in 16 over the 4 or 5 year period to get the street completed.
Right.
With regards to the Beale Street Landing, with regards to Crosstown,
Just
with
all of it.
I mean, all this money that we seem to find, as Wanda would say, for the projects that people want to get done for other people.
Yeah.
That seems to be the priority.
Let me, just 30 seconds left. Again, all of it, from all these projects, and there's other ones, we talked about Electrolux.
Yeah.
Is it too much? Is the city overreaching?
Well, I do agree. I mean, I do think they are. You know, you got Tiger Lane, which is in my district. There are some projects that are central to the well-being of the city of Memphis, but it's these public-private partnerships that are starting to just grow out of control, and there's no rhyme or reason as to how we're getting there.
Well, we will leave it there. Thank you for being here, Harold Collins, Bill Dries, Ted Abenoff. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.